Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I'm Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Christie Lindor, author of Release. Use the power of forgiveness to get unstuck and thrive in your career. Christie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. Are you ready to get started?
Yeah, let's do this.
All right. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
I'd say from my experience, I would say just keep going, honestly. I know when I wrote my first book, The Missing Muse, I stopped and started, and a lot of that really didn't have to do with me not having content or not knowing the direction of my book. It was more so of me kind of getting blocked, right? Like, I felt like, did I know enough? Did I have enough kind of the confidence that I can put my perspectives out there in a book format? So I was kind of stuck in this kind of mindset and all this uncertainty. But I think just keep going. So it took me 10 years to write my first book, but I wouldn't change that journey. I just wish it was a lot faster, right? Because I could have wrote it, a lot sooner. So I think that's the biggest piece of advice. Just keep going.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
I think the hardest part, and again from my lens, would be giving up creative control. If you decide that you want to go kind of the commercial publishing route, which I think a lot of people do when they think about the success of a book, while that's great, there are some trade-offs that you have to consider, which could be creative control from the title to the content to where your book is distributed, to even, kind of the tone of your book and the direction that it could take. So I would say that was the hardest part is, yes, there are a lot of advantages to being commercially published, but knowing that you're able to have options and with self-publishing, and there's hybrid types of models as well, where you can kind of get both. I think that's the hardest part is the kind of figuring that out. I'd say the second part, writing the book, was easy in my opinion, just because again, it was just me kind of free-flowing thoughts. Getting the book edited sucked.
Oh yeah.
Because you think of it like you are taking a piece of coal and you're refining it and paring it down into a diamond. And so that part of the journey of the book is hard. So people always ask me, what did I enjoy the most? And I said, actually writing the book, but the publishing part is, and the editing, it's challenging, but it's rewarding when you take a look at what your final product is.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Yeah, sure. I would have to say for my first book, the Missing Muse, 100+ selected practices, unwritten rules, and habits of great consultants, I actually started marketing the book a year before the book came out. And because when I knew I was getting close to finishing the book, I really didn't have an online presence at that particular time. So I didn't even have a Facebook account. I wasn't on Instagram. I was barely on LinkedIn. And I knew that building an author platform was my first step in terms of, how do I really create a marketing strategy that will be sustainable? So my fast path in doing that, and that worked really well for me, I actually started a podcast show called The Missing Muse Unplugged, which was kind of my book in living color. And I promoted the book for a year through that show. It turns out that show was for consultants, and it turned out that show actually did really, really well. It hit top 50, on iTunes, got a lot of tens of thousands of downloads because it was such a niche podcast based book. And, that paid off dividends. So I obviously I did a lot of other different things with strategy, but creating the podcast and having those weekly episodes and having people get engaged was a great kind of fast path to someone like myself who did not have a following on social media. So I think, if I think about the one thing, I think about, if you're thinking about creating a marketing strategy, think about what is the anchor of your platform. For me, it was a podcast. For someone else, it may be a blog. For another person, it may be, YouTube videos, or it may be, you may have a social media. But I think in order to be, successful as an author, not just to write the book, but also to have people buy it and talk about it and engage with you and create that relationship, you definitely need some sort of anchor platform. I think that's really, really critical.
When you mentioned your podcast hit the top 50, so what strategies were you doing to build your podcast?
So I mentioned the book. My book I wrote was pretty much a primer on how to be a great consultant. And I have been a consultant my entire career, over 18 plus years. The reason that I think it kind of got so much traction, I tapped into my network. And guess what? I have a network of over 18 years of consultants, hundreds and hundreds of them from all, different firms that I worked at, different projects that I've been on. So literally, the fact that my podcast was very niche, the fact that I had a really big network in the consulting space. And I actually, when I started it, I said, you know what, what's the best way? Let me just kind of interview my friends, right? That was kind of the fast path again. And so when I interviewed them and they tell each other, and, it was kind of this tribal effect where it really kind of rocketed. And then what ended up happening, which was also interesting, was that at the same time I was starting to do talks at different colleges. I was going to, being a speaker, and I would go to the consulting clubs, at these, colleges. And I live in Boston. So Boston is college town. And that kind of created a little bit of a viral effect. Because again, there were hardly any podcasts on consulting, never mind one being done by a female and a female of color. So my voice and kind of the angle of my show and kind of everything I brought was really, really, really unique.
Well, you mentioned speaking at clubs too. So I know a lot of the Ivy League clubs, Ivy League schools, they're very much club based. You have clubs for this, clubs for that. Harvard, Yale in particular. So were you speaking more to the Ivy League schools in regards to these clubs?
Yeah, I was speaking at all types of schools, whether it was Ivy League or if it was your city university. I was speaking across all those, and I was also speaking. I had set up workshops on how to be a consultant. I had set them up at the Boston Public Library, which is the central library in Massachusetts. So I was not only getting college students, I was not only getting my network, I was also getting people that were professionals that had been looking to make a pivot into consulting, and there was nothing that was really for them, that kind of helped walk them through that. So this was like the first foray. So I had so many different types of groups of people that were listening to the podcast or being part of the show. That I think just again the combination, because it was so niche, that I was able to really kind of hone in on who my podcast was for.
And so with the podcast, then that helps build the book. So I'm assuming during the podcast you were talking about your journey about writing the book, kind of taking people through that entire step-by-step process. What was your strategy with that for them to connect with you, and also to help with your book launch with using the podcast as that anchor?
Yeah, so in the podcast, I mentioned that it was my book in living color. So I have, I'd say, maybe 23, 25 chapters in the book, and it's a very broad-based book. So I cover a range of different topics at a very high level across the book. And I did that purposeful because I know in the future my goal is to write for each of those chapters, to blow it out into a book, in and of itself. So that was the original setup for that book. But every topic I talked about, so if I talked about personal branding for consultants, or how to get through a project, or if you're having problems with your team. Those are the topics that I cover, because those are what consultants want to hear about. I think I talked about writing a book maybe one episode, but majority of it was really kind of, understanding the nuts and bolts of what makes a great consultant and what tactics and strategies you need to do to put that in place, in motion, and people sharing their journey and stories, and me sharing best practices in that regard, which is kind of how the book is structured. So it was really interesting, even though I covered a lot of the same topics in the book, because of kind of the voices that were coming into it, people still got something a little different than what they would get from the book. Which was really cool. So I know that was the strategy I used, and it worked really well because, within 72 hours of my book launch, I had a really successful book launch party. Maybe like a week before it was for pre-sale at the time, and the party was jam-packed with a lot of people that I had been working with and had our podcast listeners, one, but two. The book hit the Amazon bestsellers list within 72 hours of it being launched, which, for me, I did not, I didn't know. That was kind of like a nice reward for all of the work that was put into the marketing strategy.
Got it. Now, you mentioned your book launch party. So what did that entail? Because I always love to hear that my guests do book launch parties, because, not a sign-in, just a party to really promote that book. So tell us a little bit more about that journey.
Yeah, that was I think outside of my wedding, that was a great moment, just because I had such a collision of different people from different parts of my life there. It was funny. One of the consulting leaders that I work with, she was at the party, and she's like, this is actually like she's like, I hate to think of it this like dark like this, but this is kind of like a funeral where you have people from all walks of life, from all parts of your life, come to kind of celebrate, this accomplishment. And that was really cool to be part of it. So yeah, it was a party. Yes, people could buy books there. I was signing books, but it was really a huge get together. It was hundreds of people, taking pictures. We had like a picture booth set up. We had a little bit of a speaking thing, but we were also giving away every hour. I'm sorry, not every hour. I think every half hour, we were giving away a ton of different prizes. So when, like I mentioned, I had a lot of different guests that were all in consulting, doing different services. So I reached out to many of them and said, hey, I'm having a book launch party. Would you be interested in donating either one of your services or a prize or something related to consulting that the people coming there would be interested in? So some people, they gave like, case study, tutorial, gift certificates. A couple folks were authors, and they, gave copies of their book. Other folks gave coaching sessions on how, to do better in their consulting career. So every gift, it was well over $3,000 worth of prizes that people were winning. So I did that, and then the nice part of the book launch, it was also an ebook launch. So at the same time, we were streaming it on Facebook because I had such a huge podcast following. We had another 70 people that had tuned into the Facebook and were leaving messages and, kind of, helping hashtag. And again, I think that helped drive a lot of the sales that I saw online that really ultimately led to the book hitting bestseller status.
So I absolutely love that. You have given us just a ton of great value with that question. I know we took it in a bunch of different directions. Plus, I'm going to take a play out of your playbook because I absolutely love the idea of streaming your book launch party. Now, I say that because we're actually doing a book launch party for our business book, and we're going to be doing it late July, early August. And I just absolutely love the idea of also making it a Facebook Live, streaming it, having that call to action. It's a brilliant concept. I love it.
Yeah, it worked out really well. I had two hosts. I had one host that was focused on the crowd in the room. We literally spilled out into the street. So she was in the room and she was hyped. And then I had another host that was focused on the Facebook crowd. And so she, kind of like an MTV person, she kind of set the place up, and then she was walking around having people talk, people talk to each other. So it was funny. I would see the camera every now and again say, hey guys, on Facebook, but she was kind of hosting the party. So it was like two parties happening simultaneously. And I think honestly, Paul, I feel like that was really what, that hype and that excitement, and so many people, all parts of my life, all parts of consulting. I think that, like I said, it was outside of my wedding, it was like the best night ever.
Well, and the best part is you have fun with it. When you have fun with it, that warms the crowd, that increases conversion. Everyone's having a great time. So, I mean, I love that. Have the paperback copy at the event, and then, have a link for the ebook online. That's genius. So I just took a bunch of notes because I'm going to put some of your strategies. I absolutely love your concept with the book launch party and also with the stream, and that is the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it was a lot of work, I'll tell you that. I mean, it took a lot. It took a good, I had a planning team, I had people walking around selling the books, with the phone to kind of swipe. I mean, it took a full production to put it on. But it was well worth them. Like I said, within 72 hours of that party, the book, hit bestsellers, and it stayed bestsellers for about a week or so, across both ebook as well as the paperback. And it got so much momentum over time. I've won, at least 4 or 5 different awards for the book. But it also, I think that night, because of the buzz, it ultimately led to me getting a commercial deal with one of the biggest audiobook companies in the world. So my audiobook came out in November of last year. Maybe it was like 9 months after my book launch. But that commercial deal, I believe, resulted from the all the goodwill and all the the vibes from that two for one party.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Yeah, I saw that question, and I was just thinking about like I have so many favorite books. I would say the one book that really was life changing for me and helped me really think of things differently was Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. So that's like a classic. I think a lot of people hear about that book, but for me, being first generation American, I'm the first college grad of my family. There was a lot of concepts that I felt like, when I look at the poor dad example, I was like, yeah, that was kind of how I was brought up and raised to think about money. And I'm glad that I read that book when I first graduated undergrad. That has been it's been really a game changer in terms of how I view wealth and how I view kind of, how to create wealth and make money. And that served me, like tenfold. So for me, I think, and I love a lot of different books, but I think that one was just like such a light bulb moment for me in my life.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
My favorite quote is I've had this quote over like for I can't remember how many years that I've had that. I think when I first started my career, but it's my mantra that how does it go? Hold on, let me make sure I remember it. So it's success, for people who are successful, they don't just like get success. They really kind of they wake up and work hard at it. And I just totally butchered the quote but I remember like that being an important mantra for me, is that I have to get up if I want anything in life. I have to kind of get up every day and just keep and work hard at whatever it is. And I'm glad that I had that helped me out tremendously in the beginnings of my career. Kind of that anchor quote. And I think over time, now my favorite quote is, being present, right? And really, really, really being present in everything that I do, and making sure that I bring my best in everything that I do.
Well, Christie, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Thank you for having me, Paul. I really appreciate it. I think the best way, you can go to my website, ChristieLindor.com. It'll connect you to my whole ether, my whole ecosystem. Also, if you are on LinkedIn, I'm big on LinkedIn, so you can look me up, Christie Lindor. Love to connect.
Christie, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.